Emily's breath caught as she stepped into the sterile hospital room, her heart pounding in her chest. The doctor stood by her son's bed, a pitiful expression on his face. "I'm sorry. There's nothing more we can do," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. Emily's legs buckled beneath her, and she sank into the nearest chair. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of the world collapsed upon her shoulders. Her son, Jason, lay motionless, his chest barely rising with each labored breath. Emily's mind raced. How had everything gone so wrong? How could the life she had built for herself and her son unravel so quickly? Her entire world had been her son's smile, his laugh, and now she couldn't bear to imagine a future without him. She closed her eyes, hoping the truth would vanish, but it didn't. She was losing him, and there was nothing she could do. After the doctor's departure, Emily, 32, sits in the silence of the hospital room, the weight of the news pressing heavily on her. She tries to find the strength to breathe, but each inhale feels like a struggle. The clock ticks loudly, as though mocking her. Her mind races through memories of Jason's childhood, the laughter, the playfulness, the innocence. She looks at his frail body in the bed, wishing she could somehow turn back time. "How could this happen?" she whispers, though she knows there's no answer. A small part of her still hopes that the doctor is wrong, that somehow there's a way out, but deep down she knows the truth. She's losing him, and the world as she knows it is slipping away. The sound of the door clicking open brought Emily, 32, back to reality. Kate, her best friend, entered the room, her expression filled with concern. "I'm so sorry, Emily," she said softly, as if she knew there were no words to make it better. Emily turned her face to Kate, her eyes empty, a vacant stare that betrayed the exhaustion and grief running through her. Kate stepped closer, kneeling beside her, trying to reach her with comforting words. "I'm here for you, you know that, right?" she whispered. But Emily couldn't find the strength to respond. Everything felt distant, as if she was living outside her own body. "I don't know what to do anymore, Kate," Emily murmured, barely able to keep her voice steady. Kate reached out, placing a hand on Emily's trembling arm. "We'll get through this together, Emily. You're not alone." But in Emily's heart, she knew the path ahead was one she had to walk alone, even if Kate stayed by her side. As the minutes passed, the room became a suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Emily, 32, began to drift in her thoughts. She remembered the days when Jason, 10, had been full of energy, his laughter ringing through their home, his boundless enthusiasm for the simplest things. She hadn't known how much she depended on him to brighten her world until now. Now, all she had were these fading memories. She couldn't help but feel guilty. Was there something she missed? Something she should have done differently? "I failed him," she whispered to herself, the weight of her own guilt making her chest tighten. Kate, 31, who had been quietly observing, softly placed her hand on Emily's shoulder, silently telling her that the blame wasn't hers to carry. But Emily didn't know how to let go of it. How could she have known? How could she have prepared for this? Hours later, the hospital room was still. Jason, 10, was breathing shallowly, the machines beeping in an unrelenting rhythm. Emily, 32, felt exhaustion weigh heavily on her, and she could feel the emptiness growing inside her. The feeling of helplessness clawed at her heart, threatening to consume her. As she stared at her son, she fought the urge to scream, to shake him awake, to make everything go back to how it was before. But she couldn't. The doctor had spoken the truth. This was the reality now. "How am I supposed to go on?" Emily whispered into the silence. Kate, 31, who had stepped out for a brief moment, returned with a cup of coffee in her hands. She paused at the door, seeing Emily in her quiet anguish. "I don't know, Em," Kate said, sitting beside her. "But we take it one step at a time." Emily nodded slowly, but the words didn't comfort her. She was numb, unsure of how she could possibly face tomorrow or the next moment. The phone call was like a lifeline, but it was also a dark promise. Jake, an old acquaintance from Emily's past, offered to help. His voice was smooth, persuasive. "I can get you the money you need, Emily, but there's a cost." Emily felt the familiar pang of unease as she gripped the phone tightly. She hadn't heard from Jake in years, not since things fell apart. He had always been a bit of a wild card, a risky character, but he knew how to make things happen. "It's not just money, Jake," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What are you asking for?" He paused before responding. "It's simple. I help you, and you help me. That's all." Emily closed her eyes, heart pounding in her chest. Was this really the only option left? She could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She needed the money for Jason, but at what cost? "I'll think about it," she finally muttered, her mind racing. Later that night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Jake's offer sat heavy in her mind, gnawing at her with every passing minute. She stared at the pile of medical bills on her kitchen table. She had tried everything, working double shifts, cutting back on everything that wasn't essential. Still, it was never enough. But this offer, it felt like a dangerous gamble. Would taking money from Jake push her further into the life she'd worked so hard to leave behind? Could she really afford to make a deal with someone like him? Emily knew she was desperate, but this felt wrong. A betrayal of everything she had fought for. She looked over at Jason, sleeping peacefully in his room. She couldn't let him down. But was sacrificing her dignity worth saving him? She hesitated. The clock ticked louder, each second marking the time she spent contemplating a decision she never thought she would have to make. She needed answers, but the truth was, she was running out of time. The next morning, Emily called Jake. She could feel the weight of her decision settle deep within her chest, but she needed to know what she was getting into. "I'll take the money," she said, her voice firm, though her stomach churned with unease. "But you need to be clear with me, Jake. What do you want in return?" Jake's voice was smooth, calm, as if he had anticipated her agreement. "I'm not asking for much, Emily. Just a little favor down the road. Something small, nothing you can't handle." His words were vague, and that made her nervous. He was the kind of person who operated in the gray areas, and those areas always had a cost. "I just need a little security, Emily. You help me when the time comes and I'll get you everything you need." Emily took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she set the phone down. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she had no choice. Jason needed the treatment, and she needed to believe that this decision wouldn't destroy her. The first payment from Jake came through that afternoon. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the deposit confirmation on her phone screen. The numbers were too large, too significant to ignore. She had made the deal, but now the reality of it hit her like a freight train. The money was in her bank account, but so were the strings Jake had attached. He hadn't asked for much yet, but Emily knew that when the time came, it wouldn't be simple. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "We're even now, Emily. When I need you, I'll call. Don't forget you owe me." A shiver ran down her spine. She hadn't expected him to be so blunt. The deal was done, but it was clear that Jake's idea of help came with a price. The weight of her decision pressed harder on her chest. There was no turning back now. Emily felt like she had just crossed a line, one that she couldn't uncross, no matter how much she wanted to. As Emily left the bank, she felt a surge of guilt wash over her. She had the money she needed, but at what cost? Walking back to her car, she tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. She had never imagined that the path to saving Jason would lead her to this moment, to making deals with people she had sworn to leave behind. The world she had tried to escape was creeping back into her life, and no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she knew it was her fault. "I'll do whatever it takes," she had told herself when Jason was first diagnosed. But this wasn't the path she had envisioned. She could only hope that whatever Jake asked of her in the future wouldn't be something she couldn't live with. But deep down, Emily feared it might be too late to turn back now. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as she reviewed the medical papers in front of her. Jason's condition had worsened overnight. The doctors had confirmed that the treatment they had started wasn't enough, and time was running out. She couldn't afford the next round of expensive treatments, let alone the experimental therapies that might save him. A deep, painful breath filled her lungs as she stared at the pile of bills. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered aloud, though she knew the answer. She had made a deal with Jake. It wasn't the future she wanted, but it was the one she had. And now, the price was starting to show itself. The weight of her choices pressed heavily on her chest. She had hoped the money would be the answer, but with each passing day, it seemed more like the beginning of a darker path. "I'm so sorry, Jason," she muttered, guilt clawing at her. But she had to keep moving forward. There was no turning back now. Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. She had received a text from Jake. "It's time." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The debt she owed wasn't something he would forget. Emily closed her eyes, feeling a wave of dread wash over her. "How did I get here?" she thought. She thought about all the small sacrifices, the compromises she had made for Jason, but somehow this felt like the tipping point. She had promised herself she would never go back to that life, the one that Jake represented. But here she was, unable to see another way out. Jason needed help, and Jake was the only person who could give it to her now. Emily clenched her jaw and typed out a response. "I'll be there." It wasn't what she wanted, but she didn't have any more options. As much as she hated it, she knew she had to face the consequences of her choices. The car ride felt longer than it was. As Emily drove to the meeting spot, Jake had texted her. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, fear, anger. She had always tried to protect Jason from this kind of world, but now it was all crashing down around her. The decision to meet Jake was the hardest one she had ever made. She didn't know what he would ask, or how much further down the path she would have to go. What if he wanted more than she was willing to give? What if the deal turned into something worse? But she had no answers, only questions. The sound of the tires on the road was a constant hum, and it felt like the world around her was closing in. She had promised herself that she would do anything for Jason. But at this moment, the line between doing what was right and doing what was necessary felt incredibly blurred. "I just hope this is enough," she whispered to herself. Emily parked her car and stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. The alley was dimly lit, the faint smell of damp concrete in the air. She could feel the weight of her decisions press heavily on her, and as she walked toward the spot where Jake had said to meet, her mind ran through all the possible scenarios. What would he want from her? How far was she willing to go? Jake was already standing there, leaning against a brick wall, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he knew she would come. "You made it," he said smoothly, his tone calm and reassuring. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world she couldn't control. "Let's talk business," Jake added, as he gestured for her to follow him into the shadows. Emily hesitated for a moment, but stepped forward, the darkness feeling heavier with each step she took. The deal was sealed. Jake's terms were clear, though they left Emily feeling more trapped than ever. He didn't want anything extravagant, just a small favor when the time came. But that favor was left vague, and the uncertainty gnawed at Emily. She had hoped for clarity, but all she had was more questions. Jake smiled as he handed her a small envelope, the same amount of money she had received before. "Just remember, I'll come to collect when the time is right," he said, his voice cool and collected. "You'll know when it happens." As he turned to leave, Emily stood there for a moment, the envelope in her hand like a weight around her neck. She had hoped this would be the end, but it was only the beginning. As the sound of Jake's footsteps faded, Emily felt the overwhelming sense of unease settle deep within her. What had she just agreed to? And what kind of future was she walking into? Emily's heart raced as she stood at the door to Jake's apartment. She had arrived earlier than planned, a mix of anticipation and fear gnawing at her insides. The promise of an explanation, an answer to what this was all about, pushed her forward. Jake opened the door with a calm smile, like nothing had changed. "I knew you'd be back," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Emily stepped over the threshold, taking in the apartment's familiar but cold atmosphere. "What do you want, Jake?" Her voice was firm, but inside she was trembling. He motioned to the couch, gesturing for her to sit. "Nothing much," he replied coolly. "Just making sure you're ready for the next part. It's all about timing, Emily, and now the time is right." Emily sat, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what was coming, but she could feel the weight of it bearing down on her. This was the moment she had feared. Jake led Emily to the couch, his movements deliberate. He leaned back, watching her closely as she sat stiffly, still unsure of what to expect. "You've done well so far, Emily," he began, his voice smooth. "But there's one more step to complete our arrangement." Emily's heart dropped. She had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud made her stomach churn. "What is it?" she asked, trying to mask the fear in her voice. Jake smirked, enjoying the tension. "It's simple. I need you to handle a small task for me. Don't worry, it won't be hard, just a favor. Once it's done, Jason gets the treatment he needs. Everything will be settled." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of task?" she asked, already fearing the answer. Jake leaned forward, his smile widening. "You'll find out soon enough. The choice is yours, but if you want your son's life to be saved, you'll do it. There's no turning back." Emily paced the apartment after Jake's ultimatum. Her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. She couldn't bring herself to do whatever Jake was asking. The price of Jason's treatment was too steep, too dark. How far am I willing to go? She wondered. Her breath was shallow as she realized she had no choice. If she refused, Jason's treatment might slip through her fingers. But if I do this, I'll lose everything, she thought. The guilt clawed at her, but she couldn't see a way out. She needed to protect Jason. She needed to save him at all costs. The choices she had made so far seemed small in comparison to what Jake was now asking. Yet for her son's life she knew she would have to make a sacrifice, one she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As she turned to Jake, the decision weighed heavily on her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice cracking. "But I need to know what I'm getting into." Jake handed Emily a small, unmarked envelope. "This is all you'll need," he said. "Make sure to deliver it as instructed, and don't get creative, just do what I say, simple." Emily stared at the envelope in her hand, her stomach twisted with unease. She had come this far, but the final step felt like a betrayal of everything she had fought for. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing will go wrong, Emily. You just follow through, and your son will get the treatment. That's the deal." Emily nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she gripped the envelope tighter. She had never wanted to be involved in something like this. But now, the truth was inescapable. She was already too deep to turn back. "I'll do it," she said, her voice hollow. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince herself or Jake. Emily drove home in a daze, the envelope resting on the passenger seat beside her. Each street she passed seemed like a reminder of how far she had fallen from the person she used to be. As she approached her apartment, she thought of Jason, lying in his bed, unaware of the cost she had just agreed to pay for his future. The guilt was suffocating, but it wasn't as overpowering as her need to protect him. "What have I done?" she asked herself, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had promised herself that no matter what, she would be the one to save him. But now, with the envelope in her possession, it felt like she had lost herself in the process. She couldn't see the end of this road, only the painful steps ahead. When she finally parked the car and got out, the air felt colder, as if it reflected the emptiness she now felt. Emily stood in front of Jason's bedroom door, the envelope still in her hand. She had barely slept, and the weight of what she had done was heavy on her heart. Every moment felt like 1,000 seconds. The phone call from Jake had confirmed that the task was done, and Jason would get his treatment. But the satisfaction of saving him felt hollow, knowing she had made a deal with the devil. Her mind raced with the consequences of her choices. "I did what I had to do," she whispered to herself, but the words felt empty. The sound of Jason's soft breathing on the other side of the door reminded her of the love she had for him, the love that drove her to this dark place. She hesitated, unsure if she could face him, knowing the truth would never be the same. As Emily stepped into Jason's room, her heart swelled with emotion. He was asleep in his bed, his small form surrounded by the soft light of his night lamp. She took a deep breath, her chest tight. She had kept him safe, for now. But at what cost? Emily sat beside him, gently brushing his hair away from his face. "I did this for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. The room felt suffocating, the silence pressing in on her. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. She could never undo what she had done, no matter how much she wished she could go back. Her gaze lingered on his peaceful face, and for a moment everything seemed perfect again. But the reality of her decisions loomed large. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in the living room, staring at the floor. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and her mind raced with the weight of her actions. She could hear the faint sounds of Jason moving around in his room, unaware of the burden his mother carried. The money, the task, the deal with Jake, they were all part of the same cruel puzzle she had constructed to save him. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the envelope. What if this is just the beginning, she wondered. She had done what she thought was necessary, but at what cost? Was there a limit to how far she would go for him? And what would happen when Jake called in his favor? She stared into the empty space in front of her, feeling more lost than ever. The following day, Emily received another message from Jake. "Time to settle up," it read. Her heart skipped a beat. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in her gut. She was no longer in control. Jake had kept his word, and now it was time for her to fulfill hers. The tension in her chest was unbearable. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. "This is for Jason," she reminded herself, but the words didn't bring comfort anymore. She didn't know what Jake wanted or what would come next, but she could feel the danger closing in. Her fingers tightened around the phone, and she sent a quick reply, confirming she would meet him. The final step of her descent had begun. Emily arrived at the meeting place, a dimly lit cafe in the outskirts of town. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space, and she could feel every eye in the room following her as she walked in. Jake was sitting at a corner table, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You came," he said with a slight nod, his tone neutral. Emily's heart raced, and her palms were sweaty. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled, but it was a smile that sent chills down her spine. "I just need you to keep your word. Everything you've done has been for him, Emily. Now it's time for me to collect." The finality in his voice made her stomach drop. She wasn't sure what he meant, but the dread in her chest told her this was the point of no return. Emily stood at the edge of the alley, the weight of Jake's words still lingering in her mind. She had agreed to his terms, but now she questioned her decision more than ever. What is this really about? She asked herself. The air was cold, biting, and the street lights cast long, dark shadows, making her feel more isolated. She had done everything to save Jason, but this final task had left her feeling trapped. Thought of losing herself in the process of protecting her son gnawed at her. But as she looked at the hospital bills in her bag, she knew there was no other choice. She had promised to do anything, and now she was bound to that promise. With a deep breath, she walked forward, the darkness swallowing her. Emily arrived at the location Jake had given her, a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building loomed in the distance, its windows cracked and its walls weathered. She parked her car, heart pounding, and walked toward the entrance, each step heavier than the last. The air felt thick, like it was holding her in place. The deal was supposed to be simple, but the reality of it was much darker than she had expected. As she reached for the door, she hesitated, wondering if she could still back out. But she knew it was too late for that. Jake's influence had already taken hold, and now she had to face whatever came next. Inside the warehouse, Jake was already waiting. He sat in a chair, his back to her as he glanced over some papers. "You're late," he remarked casually, not looking up. Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you want from me, Jake?" she demanded. He smiled, a knowing grin that sent a chill down her spine. "I told you, it's simple. Just hand over what I asked for, and everything's settled." The room was dark, only a few overhead lights flickering intermittently. Emily's breath quickened. "What happens now?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jake finally looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "Now, you do your part." Emily's hands shook as she handed over the envelope. Jake took it without a word, his eyes never leaving hers. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. As he opened it, he finally spoke, his voice low and satisfied. "You did good, Emily," he said, folding the envelope and slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Your son will get the treatment he needs. Everything is as it should be." Emily exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. She still didn't know what Jake had planned, or when he would come asking for his favor. But for now, Jason's life was safe. She had kept her word, but at what cost? "This isn't over, is it?" she asked softly. Jake didn't answer right away, but his smile told her all she needed to know. As Emily walked back to her car, the weight of the envelope gone but the burden still heavy, she realized she had crossed a line she could never uncross. The cold night air bit at her skin, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside her. Jason was safe, but for how long? How much longer could she keep him protected? She drove home in silence, her mind spinning with fear and regret. The deal with Jake wasn't over. It was just beginning. She didn't know what he would ask of her, but she knew that when the time came, she would have to make another choice. One that might cost her even more than she could bear. The day Jason was set to start his new treatment, Emily felt a strange mix of relief and dread. She had done everything she could to save him, but Jake's shadow still loomed over her. The deal was done, but the fear of what would come next haunted her. "It's for you, Jason," she whispered as she watched him prepare for his treatment. The hospital room was calm, but Emily couldn't shake the anxiety in her chest. Her hands trembled as she signed the paperwork, knowing she had crossed a line. She had traded a piece of her soul for his life, but she couldn't afford to think about the cost right now. All that mattered was that Jason had a chance. As he entered the treatment room, she whispered, "Please be okay." Emily sat in the waiting room, the hours dragging on as she nervously watched the clock. Each second felt like an eternity. What if something goes wrong, she thought, her mind spiraling into worst-case scenarios. She had no idea what Jake's next move would be, or how far he would push her. The hospital doors opened, and a nurse stepped in, her expression unreadable. "He's finished the treatment," the nurse said. "He'll need rest, but it went well." Emily exhaled, but her relief was short-lived. The deal was done, but it wasn't over. The threat of Jake still lingered in her mind, like a storm cloud. "It's not over yet," she muttered to herself, her fingers clenching tightly around the chair. Later that night, Emily stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself anymore. She had done everything for Jason, but the cost was more than she had ever anticipated. She had made deals, sacrifices, and now her future seemed uncertain. "What have I become?" she thought, her mind racing through everything she had done to protect her son. The quiet apartment felt suffocating, the silence of the night pressing in on her. Her phone buzzed and she froze, knowing it was Jake. "It's time," the message read. Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that after Jason's treatment, she could finally breathe easy. But it was clear Jake was not done with her yet. Jake's phone call was brief, but it was enough to make Emily's blood run cold. "Meet me at the old pier," Jake instructed. Emily's stomach turned. She knew this was the moment, the one where everything she had been avoiding would come crashing down. She didn't know what Jake would ask of her, but she had a sinking feeling it would be something she couldn't walk away from. The drive to the pier felt longer than usual, each mile taking her deeper into the unknown. As she approached the dock, the foggy night and the crashing waves created an eerie backdrop. She couldn't turn back now. Whatever Jake wanted, it was time to face it. Jake stood at the edge of the pier waiting. His figure was almost lost in the mist, but his presence was unmistakable. Emily approached cautiously, every step echoing in the silence. "You've done well so far, Emily," Jake said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "But now, we're done." Emily's heart raced. This was it. The deal was over, and she had no idea what Jake's final move would be. "You're free now, Emily," Jake added with a slight smirk, but his tone held something darker. "But you'll always remember what you did for him." Emily stood there, her mind spinning, trying to process what this meant. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had sacrificed so much, but she had done it all for Jason. As Jake turned and walked away, Emily was left standing alone, the fog closing in around her, feeling like the weight of everything had finally been lifted.